Good afternoon and welcome to week 6 of Lunch with Lisa. This is episode 26. And after a beautiful weekend, I don't know about all of you, but I certainly got out and I got to get in my garden. And I always try and change up my background every week. And so I brought some flowers in from the front, and I got a new orchid, and it feels like spring and summer. And I don't know. I'm ready for this week. I hope you all are. And I want to thank today's guest, Bob Cramer, who was a last minute addition to Lunch with Lisa this week. So Bob, thank you so much for coming to us via satellite from the front of our house. Mm-hmm. But really, I had wanted to have you on, and I really appreciate that you came on to fill in for today. Of course, sometimes there's some last minute schedule changes, and I want to thank everybody who's watching today. For those of you who don't know Bob, outside of maybe me, but Bob, you actually, before me, were a 5-time CEO. You're a board member, investor. You've navigated multiple venture-backed technology startups from Series A to liquidity. And you know what it's like to be in the seat of any CEO. And now you've become the ultimate CEO coach. And it's so fun to be able to hear about what you do every day. And I know that during this time, you've been especially helpful in advising your clients and others in what are new and unique challenges. And Bob, I do have a couple of fun surprises. I don't know if you know that today is Star Wars Day. Did you know that? No, may the 4th be with you. And so I brought this. Some of your clients have referred to you as their Yoda. And this was a special design we did for one of Bob's birthdays, where we had beer labels made in different ways to represent him. And so I thought this would be fun to share when we made you Yoda on the front of a can. But I got that from your clients calling you that. And then another thing that I stole, I don't know if you know, this is another fun one we have up at the office.
Back when I was younger.
Yes, I'm glad that you believe in the power of PR. And I think what's fun is they're talking about Donald Trump, Tony Robbins, and Jack Ma from Alibaba, but the big picture is of you.
Of course.
So thank you. Thank you for coming on today and sharing your knowledge and your experience. So Bob, we talk about this a lot at home, but could you share for people obviously by now, a lot of the CEOs have already had to make really hard decisions. Right. And can you share with us, what is that like for a CEO? I think that we hear a lot about how hard it is to be an employee right now, but how hard is that for a CEO when suddenly your whole world changes? And I know you've had experience in this with a normal big shift or pivot, but what about recently?
Well, the biggest challenge is knowing what to do. And the answer is there is no answer to that. You have to do an assessment of how you have to basically predict the future. And predicting the future is impossible. But there's some guidelines. When something like this happens or a major recession happens, oftentimes the most important thing in the business, besides having a great company, great people, is unfortunately your cash position. Mm-hmm. And if you're a fast startup company, oftentimes you are funded by investors, and you rely on your next 2 or 3 years worth of execution based on raising more money. What happens when the revenue starts dropping and your cash burn starts going up? What happens when the prospects of raising money is reduced because it's much harder to get capital, or it's much more expensive to get capital? So unfortunately, what these CEOs have to do is they have to look hard at the situation and adjust the risk profile to their cash position. And oftentimes cash position means cutting expenses, and too often cutting expenses means cutting headcount, which is a really hard thing to do for CEOs that have invested so much in hiring really great people and building really great cultures. But it's something you have to look at.
And you work primarily with venture-backed high-growth companies. Right. So again, some of them, maybe there's more opportunity right now. Some of them, this has completely shifted their business. Mm-hmm. But across all businesses, again, I think every CEO is in a tough spot right now, and they've made a lot of adjustments. And now what? So they've made an adjustment. You've had to tell your teams. It's probably shaken your culture some. What now what? Where are they now in this process?
Actually, a lot of them are still. A lot have gone through it, but a lot of them are still going through it. For instance, I've got a very wide range of customers. I've got some customers who all of a sudden they have to. I have one client, I can't mention who, that focused on a market that essentially dried up overnight, literally overnight. Mm-hmm. And what they did is they cut their staff from over 600 people by 575 people to a foundational staff that allows them to survive to the other side of it, and then they'll just grow back up again, hopefully, because their position in the market is very, very strong. Other side of the spectrum is I have 3 companies who just raised major rounds of financing. One that was just announced, they raised us a preemptive Series B, meaning someone came to them to offer them money, and they raised another $25 million on $100 million pre on a company that just started shipping product. It's quite amazing, but it's all over the gambit. And then I've got another client that has always they bootstrapped the company. They raised very little money. They are extremely profitable, and they pride themselves on being very efficient. But all of a sudden, they're looking at this and saying, you know what? It's not how well you perform as a company. It's your customers have to spend money. And if they, and every single company is looking at this and saying, what do they do in terms of cutting their expenses? And it just propagates forward. So even the best of companies and the most well-run companies are doing that. So all these companies are now coming to terms with that. And what you really want to do is you want to, number one is over-communicate. Be overly transparent with your team. I mean, basically, let them know exactly what's going on, which in this COVID environment makes it even more difficult because it's not like, hey, let's go gather in the lunchroom and talk about it. Right.
Though interestingly, you and your clients have been on Zoom all along. You would be working from Zoom all the time. And I would see how efficient that was. And that just wasn't what my industry used all the time. And so to be honest, I feel like your industry, if that's, again, high growth tech, we're well ahead of the curve of getting used to Zoom and all these meetings. And so you're watching all of us trying to catch up on that. And you were all very well versed in that. So
on a one-on-one basis, yes. On a how do you evolve and build and have a culture thrive, that's new. That's very new.
Sure.
So what most of these companies are doing is they're mirroring what works really well within their culture and carrying it forward into the virtual world. So they're having lunch and learns, but it's on Zoom. They're having more frequent stand-ups and company meetings on Zoom. One CEO, was very, very much against anyone working remotely. Just hated the concept, and all of a sudden, everyone had to work remote. And what he found was that all of a sudden, he actually, in even there was like 75 people in the company, even on Zoom, he could literally see during an all hands meeting who's engaged and how they're engaged. And it was, so he actually shifted to actually liking this environment. So
I have a question on that because someone close to me was mentioning just the other day that no one in his office will get on video. And this is a really, really big company. And so he's often the only one on video. He said that he even sent the webinar that Terry Trespicio was on talking about the importance of being on video. And he said, well, if nothing else, I want all of the leadership of our company to know that when they join a call that I'm leading or that I'm on, I'm always on video, I'm always seen, and I'm always present. And do you have thoughts, and maybe this is a little lower level, but any thoughts on the people who don't join the video?
Yes, don't allow it. I mean, if you want to participate, we want to see you. And when you're at work in an office environment and you're showing up in a conference room, you don't put a bag over your head. I mean, you're there, you're interacting, you're showing your emotions. You have body language, and that same level of more extensive communication is necessary to really have an impact. So I would personally start with the executive team. If he has any executives not doing that or managers not doing that, I'd start there and demand it. And once they try it and get used to it, they'll be perfectly comfortable with it. And by the way, I was just on a planning call with an executive team prior to this one, and I'm hearing a parrot chirping in the background. I'm hearing a baby screaming in the background. I
Right.
hear a spouse scream, cutting a deal on the other end of that little apartment. And it's just the way it is now.
What it is right now.
Yeah.
Another good question that we had was, do you think over communicating could lead to employee or customer fear or flight? And I know that people are always worried about over communicating and being too transparent with their team. What are your thoughts on that?
First, I don't think there's such a thing as over communication. There might be a what are you communicating and how are you communicating issue, but not over communication. Especially at this time here, when we talk about transparency is letting them know your thinking, letting them know where exactly we are, letting them know our plans. There are times where you can't do that. For instance, if you're a company being acquired by another public company, it's illegal to share that information. So essentially, I used to tell people I can't answer that when someone asks, "Are we being acquired?" I said I can't answer that, not because we are or we aren't, because if we were, I couldn't say no or yes.
Sure.
So right, but in general, the only time, when we didn't talk about cutting headcount, because what most companies are doing, actually not all, I have some companies who are still growing through this, but cautiously. I have some companies that are growing. They're using this as a huge opportunity to upgrade their team. So they're hiring major strategic positions, A+ players, and performance managing out the bottom things. And you might say, "Oh, it's not horrible or mean," but it's pretty critical.
Right. Well, there's a tremendous amount of talent
because in this world here.
I think we talked over each other.
Sorry about that.
Are your clients finding
if this doesn't work,
that they're because there's like 2-second delay? Are your clients finding that there is talent available out there that maybe wasn't before, or
Absolutely.
Is there a flight to certain types of companies to work for then?
There is definitely talent out there. The best people are always hard to find, but there are far more of them available right now. The other thing, getting back away from the talent for a second, let's just finish up the transparency thing.
Sure.
With transparency, it's what you don't want to be doing is saying, well, there's no way we're going to kind of cut employees and then 3 weeks later, do a 40% headcount reduction. Right? You want to be real with people, saying we're in a strong cash position. Our business is still looking good, even though we're keeping a close eye on it. We are doing whatever we can to not have to do that, but there's nothing. Those sorts of words, as opposed to don't bullshit them, and also don't say, "Oh, we might have to cut all of you, but we don't know yet." That doesn't work either.
Right. So the other thing that you are very strong at is helping teams communicate in in their organizational fashion, right? And I don't know how relevant this is to right now, but one of the things that you've done with my team is the stop, start, continue, where people in a very trusted setting say, "I need you to stop this, I need you to start this, and I need you to continue this." And the idea that you always say is that truth is a gift. And how does that relate to now and how teams are communicating with one another, especially in this very different type of work environment, everybody working from home, where trust has to be the highest it's ever been? How does that all work right now?
There's actually an opportunity, because it's very personal. This is my office here. You're reading a little bit about who I am, because I have guitars everywhere, right? And everyone has their home and their office and their background noise, and all of a sudden you're there. It's a whole another level of seeing who that person is. So I think there's an opportunity to actually up that level of trust quite a bit by bringing a little bit more of the personal, the person outside of work into that environment. But just in general, again, no matter what we do, we have to be very, very communicative in terms of what we need from other folks, and when someone's performing well and not, I view this strangely as almost a better forum for doing that. I used to think that it's always better face to face, but this has been working pretty well. Yeah.
So one of the things I do hear from people, and I guess for the audience to bear with us, we did not prep questions ahead of time, but I think that's good. I actually wanted your answers. Some of the things I hear about from managers is that they're not hearing from their team members. They feel like they're chasing down their team members a lot. I think, again, that's the difference of people not always having to communicate up all the time if they were in an office. So I'm thinking back to your offsites. I'm thinking of how you really work with teams to communicate. What would you suggest to people who are not at a senior level, but are trying to really elevate their own presence right now? They're trying to take this as an opportunity to show how they can lead. What do you suggest?
Be proactive. There's, I don't know, I'm having coffee right now, and I've had beer, but I'm doing coffees and beers with people still. So it's just not face to face. It's so if it's a manager that you want to just kind of bring up to, talk about certain things, say, hey, you want to just grab a quick 15-minute coffee at this time today, and manage up and talk to them or ask them questions about situations. So I would be proactive in terms of who you want to communicate with, and keep it less formal but casual, if at all possible.
And for the senior leadership teams that are working really well right now, what are the characteristics of those teams? Because I'm thinking that the ones that weren't working well, maybe were working well because it was a strong market, strong economy. I think, you tell me, is this the time where you start to see which leadership teams are working well and not? But what are the characteristics of the ones that are?
It's very strange because I'd say almost all of my companies that I work with are doing better in terms of senior leadership team connection and communication than even before, because it's more purposeful. It's more. I have to set a time to talk to them, because I'm not just going to run across them or just walk in and knock on the door of the office. So I think what works well is just, again, back to use the word over communication, but a lot of communication, a lot of one-on-ones, a lot of team meetings. If you have a team meeting every week, maybe you have a team meeting every week and a midweek or an end of week quick stand-up call on how are things going.
Bob, I want to interrupt you real quick, because you referenced a one-on-one, which is a very common term in our office, thanks to you. But can you explain to everybody what is a one-on-one and why is it so important? And if you don't have one with your manager, why you want one?
Well, that's great. Well, essentially, when you look at the foundational elements of decision making and communication in a company, there's company meetings, which are kind of facilitating the culture and communicating the most important messages and wins and product releases in a company. There's the leadership team meeting or management meeting, depending on what tier you're in, of knocking down cross-functional issues and core communications and being very efficient, such that blockers are always knocked down on a regular basis. And then there's one-on-one meetings, which is the manager and the employee, which usually should be the employee's meeting, not the manager's meeting, where the employee goes in and gets from their manager what they need to be successful. So anything, so they set the agenda, and the manager can also be there, kind of check in against how they're performing against objectives and what they can do to help. So if a lot of people say, a lot of people say, right? Yeah, that's a weekly meeting. A lot of people, usually for 45 minutes to an hour. And a lot of people say, well, I don't need to do that. I talk to that person every single day, but it's a different meeting. When you talk to them every day, you're talking about a deal that needs to be closed or a product that needs to be released or something else. You're not you're not stepping back and looking at holistically at, how are we performing? How am I doing? What do I need to do to be doing better? Sure. And something I forgot to, going all the way back to what are companies doing. I wanted to mention one thing. In this environment, what CEOs don't want to do is they don't want to be completely defensive, meaning cut, consolidate. Right? They want to do this interesting balance of defense and offense, an interesting balance of kind of survival and thriving, right? So one of the most interesting things is if you have to cut expenses, frequently say, I'm so overloaded right now, how am I going to cut anyone Turns out they end up cutting areas that are less critical and strategic to the business. They end up cutting areas where slightly underperformers. And what they find is when they do that, they're a little bit more focused, and they have fewer people that tend to be better. And all of a sudden, the business executes as well, if not better, than it did before, which is a strange phenomenon, which gives you a foundation to build off of. The other element is think long and hard, is because we're going to be on the other side of this, and the economy is going to be really great. I don't know if it's in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 6 years, who knows? But it's going to be great. So you want to also be doing those offensive investments in areas that are core to your business, or they help you pivot to take more advantage of the situation that's sitting out there. So it's an interesting yin and yang and balancing of what you have to do.
I was reading another article about key things that CEOs need to do, and that's to stick to your core competencies. This isn't the time to suddenly shift and think, oh, I'm going to pick up this, when that's not what you generally do, but to really stick to that. We have 5 minutes left. And so I just want to encourage anybody who's out there that wants to ask a question to please do so. That's why we have Bob here to ask.
We've got a few of these. We got a few. Let me see here.
Somebody did ask if you'd be playing on Entertainment Friday, Bob.
On an Entertainment Friday? That's a maybe. Not today, though. When I'm running, I find it distracting and hard to engage a bunch of people who are not on video. Absolutely, Diane. I mean, and that's why I sometimes you don't start the meeting until everyone's on. It's back to the one-on-one thing. So sometimes I wouldn't start a one-on-one meeting unless the employee had presented an agenda. If they came in with that agenda, well, it's okay. Take 2 minutes. I'll wait for you. So if they're not on video, hey, if you're not on video, we'll wait to start. We're waiting for John to start the meeting until such and such. I know it puts him on the spot, but the hell with him. He's the one not on there. Let's see. Bob,
another thing that I know you do is you're very big on those leadership teams. And maybe it doesn't just have to be a leadership team. Maybe it's a management team that always works together, but you really cut the BS in those teams, and you make them be very transparent with one another and very accountable to one another. So it's not just, Susan always does that. Well, that's Susan, or Matt always does that, but that everybody has their almost rules of engagement, and that you're held accountable to your team. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think during this time, people probably do have various excuses, whether, and they're very real. Your kids are home, or there's this, or there's that. Right. Is there potentially imbalance with managers of who's carrying what load right now?
I'm sorry, I was looking at the questions and I missed that. One more time, please. Sorry.
Next up, relationship counselor. No, I was just saying that, and where was my question? That during this time, you hold managers strongly accountable.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, if someone says they're going to do something and they're not doing something, how can you run a business? You can't, right? If you're chasing someone. So just in general, again, different cultures exist, and I firmly believe one of the most critical elements of a cornerstone of any culture that works well is a degree of strong empowerment coupled with accountability. So empower them to do the job, and they own it. And when they say they're going to do something, they're going to do it. I trust them to do it, right? And it's not just the manager's responsibility in a staff meeting, for instance, to challenge that person for it. But if someone else in the team sees something not being done that needs to be done, that they're dependent upon to challenge, and it's not an attack on the person, it's a discussion of what's needed. So it has to be done with immense trust and mutual respect, but it has to be done.
Sure. I think that's a big piece of where I think teams can be stronger, is when you have the permission to talk honestly to one another. This is how this affected me, or this is what I need. And then on the flip side, when people need help, to be able to put their hand up and say, I'm actually going to be, behind on this, or I need help over here. And where you can I always think of it like a soccer game where, not everybody runs to the ball. They've all got their place, but sometimes you've got to go back somebody up. And that's been really helpful. We have 1 minute left. Does anybody have any other questions? Or Bob, do you have anything else that you want to add? What's your final thought? How do you hold people accountable?
Oh, there we go. Hi, Steve. So strategies of accountability. Yeah. So there's some cornerstones to accountability. They're very important. First is organizational design, such that people know what their role is and what they're fully responsible for. Okay, so that's step one. Okay, what do you own and what are you responsible? Not what do you share responsibility with like 7 people, but what do you own? Second component
Bob, I want to jump on that one. And 2 people cannot have responsibility. That was one thing that you really helped us with. It can't be that Molly and Lisa have it. Either Molly has it and Lisa's supporting, or Lisa has it and Molly's supporting. That was a really great lesson for us.
Exactly. I mean, anytime out of any meeting, there are going to be action items, and for people to be held accountable, you have to have one owner of accountability. So even if it's 7 people, it's also this person owns it with this team here. Okay, so that's perfect. Thank you, Lisa. So one is clarity in terms of ownership. The second element is they should be a participant in buying into what has to be delivered and the objective and how to. Their responsibility is to how to do it, but agreement as to what needs to be done. So if they're buying off on, let me give you an example. In the sales organization, if someone gives you a quota of $17 million and you think at 1.2 is the max I can do, I don't care if you give them 17 million, they're never going to be accountable to 17 million if they don't buy it. Right. So, and it's with any job, they have to buy into what that deliverable is and own it. So having them come up with the objectives is with you is better, or kind of co-creating it is much better than handing them something they have to do. So the second element is kind of ownership for it. And then,
with that, Bob, let me just jump on that, because there are often companies that set these insane goals that are just completely unachievable to try and push people to try and get there. And you're totally against that type of management. It has to be maybe a stretch, but there has to be a path to get there that people can buy into.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Right? I push people really hard. That's not the issue. The issue is bringing them along for the ride and having them really believe that, yes, it's a stretch, but we can do it. So then the shift goes from, rather than being defensive, I can't believe they gave me this number, I can't do it, to creatively offensive of how do we figure this out? If I just do what I was doing before, that number is not going to happen, or that can't be delivered by that date, right? My son just wrote, he's not always so calm. He can be demanding. That's pretty funny, Matt.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining. Well, I believe I actually put my fingers up like, yes, he's demanding. It's not that you're demanding. Matt, you can weigh in on this. I think Bob has very high standards and has high levels of accountability on his end, and therefore expects the same from the rest of us.
There we go.
How's that?
There we go. Perfect. Yep. Yeah. So Steve, to answer your question, accountability, holding people accountable really comes down to making certain they understand why we're doing it. They agree to the deliverable. They understand that they own it. And then they also understand when that is due, and what the other thing you want to add is there are conditions of satisfaction. And conditions of satisfaction are what, you don't say you deliver it and someone says that's crap, that you didn't do what I asked you to do. So you have to be very clear as to what is expected. And it's this particular thing that satisfies these key metrics by this date. And then you can hold people accountable. You can't hold people accountable for stuff that is different in their heads than yours.
Well, that's where in the one-on-one, you can make sure you're on the same page every week, right?
Right.
Super. This was great. We're a few minutes over. I want to thank you for coming on. Bob, you were recently on a podcast. Do you want to just share what that podcast was for people that might want to listen to that?
Basically, John Belazier, who runs a blog called, what is it? CEO. God, I'll remember in a second. Maybe you can look it up for me. Anyway, and there's an interview on what does it mean to be a CEO coach, and it's a long interview. It's about 45 minutes. But if you've ever wondered what coaching is all about and what coaching CEOs is all about, it's a pretty good resource to learn about that. So if you have any CEOs in the line or people who want to be CEOs, CEO Playbook.
Bob,
thank you.
CEO Playbook.
It's John Belazier.
CEOplaybook.co.
.io, right?
Oh, is it .io? Oh, okay.
So.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent.
Look at us. Boy, are we on top of it today. But anyway, it's the CEO Playbook. And you were on there talking about being the $1 trillion coach. And I'm sure that people will tune in for that to learn more. So again, thank you for coming on today. So appreciate it. Again, don't forget it's Star Wars Day. So if you want to learn more about the Yoda, tune in. And then also I do need to talk about tomorrow. So funny thing, Bob, that somebody posted on Facebook when I said you'd be on, they wanted to know what we have done for the growth of Ben and Jerry's. And I laughed and I said, well, quite frankly, we should have invested in it because we have been eating a lot of Ben and Jerry's in our house. That's been a new evening habit. Well, thank goodness, because tomorrow Tara Mardigan is going to be on. And Tara is known as the Plate Coach. She's a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and co-author of The Real Fit Kitchen. She was also the nutritionist for the Red Sox for a decade and the team nutritionist. And she works with people from general nutrition through recovery and using diet through recovery. And she's really fantastic. Interestingly, she was originally referred to us by an attendee. And then the minute we posted it up, it turns out she was known and friends and clients of other people that had seen our social posts. So people are really excited about Tara tomorrow. So hopefully Tara can help us, Bob, with our Ben and Jerry's obsession. And
that'd be good.
Yep. And everybody else, I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow.